Hi, I'm Madison Clark. I'm 26 years old and I work as a nurse at Mercy General Hospital in Denver. It was Christmas morning when I stepped out of the hospital after my 12-hour shift in the pediatric ward. The cold Denver air clung to my scrubs as I made my way to the parking lot. I was exhausted, but all I could think about was getting home, crawling into bed, and finally getting some peace. I imagined wrapping myself up in a blanket, sipping on some coffee, and letting the soft sounds of holiday carols fill the silence of my apartment. But when I got home, I found something that would change everything. I pulled out my phone expecting maybe a simple holiday text from a friend, but instead it was a message from my mom. She had written, "We sold your car. Family comes first. Be grateful we let you live here." And then another message came through right after, "Your sister needs a house. You'll pay $30,000 due this week." I couldn't believe what I was reading. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed was suddenly being ripped away from me. How much longer would they keep taking from me? The life I had fought so hard for was slipping through my fingers. And for the first time, I realized that I couldn't just let it happen again. Will I continue to let my family take advantage of me? Or will I finally stand up for myself? Keep listening to hear how I made the decision to break free from the grip they've had on me for so long. The cold air of Denver clung to my scrubs as I stepped out of Mercy General Hospital just as the sun began to rise on Christmas morning. After 12 straight hours on the pediatric floor, I wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed and pretend even for a few hours that life outside the hospital walls could be as gentle as the snow that was now dusting the parking lot. My breath made small clouds as I hurried across the icy asphalt, keys in hand, picturing myself wrapped in a blanket with a cup of coffee, maybe even letting the sound of holiday carols on the radio remind me what day it was supposed to be. I unlocked the apartment door, quietly dropped my bag by the couch, and collapsed on the bed without even changing clothes. My body ached in the way only nurses understand, that mix of sore feet, tired arms, and a heart still full from holding worried parents together all night. I pulled the blanket over my face, desperate for silence, when my phone vibrated against the nightstand. Half asleep, I reached for it, hoping it was a Merry Christmas from a coworker, or maybe a message from Aunt Marjorie. The screen glared too bright for my tired eyes, and then the words came into focus. "We sold your car. Family comes first. Be grateful we let you live here." I blinked, thinking exhaustion had scrambled my vision, but the words didn't change. My chest tightened as I sat up straight in bed, my heart pounding in my ears. Before I could even begin to process, another buzz rattled the phone in my hand. "Your sister needs a house. You will pay $30,000 due this week." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My mother's name was at the top, Elaine Clark, and for a moment I wondered if someone had stolen her phone. Then the reality settled in. She meant every word. The Corolla. My Corolla. The car I had worked 2 years of double shifts to afford. The one I had driven home from the lot with tears in my eyes, proud of negotiating the price by myself. It wasn't fancy, just reliable, and it was mine. My first true piece of independence. Gone, sold. Not even by my own choice. I threw back the blanket and paced the small room. The window showed rooftops lined with fresh snow, children down the street, already laughing with new sleds, the world moving on like nothing had shattered. My fingers trembled as I scrolled back to reread the message. The casual cruelty of it made me sick. Family comes first. Those words had been used against me since I was old enough to earn a paycheck. They always meant family comes first, as long as Madison is the one paying. 8 years of monthly rent handed to my parents for the privilege of staying under their roof. 8 years of groceries mysteriously running out, unless I restocked them. 8 years of sacrifice while my younger sister, Samantha, lived without responsibility, treated like royalty. $30,000. It wasn't a request, it was an order, and on Christmas morning no less. My legs gave out and I sat at the edge of the bed, phone still clutched in my hand, mind racing. They hadn't even bothered to call. Just a text, as if my savings were a family checking account they had every right to tap. I thought of the Corolla sitting in the driveway last night when I left for my shift. How had they managed to sell it so quickly? Whose name was on the paperwork? My name was on that title, I was sure of it. Unless my father had pulled one of his tricks again, sliding a form under my nose telling me it was just a registration renewal. I pressed my palms into my eyes as the memories surfaced, his impatient voice, rushing me to sign before heading out the door. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, cutting through the numbness. They had done it again. They had taken something I worked for, twisted it into their property, and discarded my feelings like wrapping paper on the floor. The phone buzzed once more, a picture this time. Samantha smiling in front of a for sale sign, pointing at a small house with a bright red door. The caption read, "Can't wait to move in. Thanks, sis." My stomach lurched. I set the phone face down on the blanket and pressed both hands to my face, trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't just about the car or the money. This was about control. About a family that had never seen me as a daughter, only as a resource. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of a neighbor's holiday music filled the silence. I sat frozen for several minutes, the weight of every past sacrifice pressing down on me. The pearls my grandmother left me now hanging around my mother's neck. The scholarship money that disappeared into bills I never saw. The countless hours of labor that should have built my future but instead fed their entitlement. I stood again, pacing, fists clenching and unclenching. The exhaustion from my shift was gone, burned away by a rising tide of fury. I had given them years of obedience, years of excuses, years of silence. Now they had sold the very symbol of my freedom and demanded more. The snow outside glowed in the morning light. Children still laughed, neighbors greeted one another with smiles, and somewhere carols played on a radio. But inside my small apartment, all I could hear was the echo of my mother's words. Family comes first. I knew then that something had shifted inside me. This Christmas would not be like the others. This time I would not bend. This time I would not pay. I sat back down, phone in hand, and stared at the screen one last time, my heart still pounding. My mother's words glared back at me, sharp as broken glass, and I felt the ground beneath my life begin to crack. The day had only just begun. When I was 18, I thought turning into an adult would mean freedom. Instead, it became the year my parents told me that living under their roof came with a price tag. $500 a month. At first, I thought they were joking, but the rent was due on the first of every month, handed over in cash to my father at the kitchen table. I still had high school homework in my backpack and a part-time job at the grocery store down the street. Yet, I was already paying to breathe in my own bedroom. 8 years later, that added up to more than $48,000. Every time I tried to save for college or even for a small emergency fund, the money slipped through their fingers. They called it responsibility. I called it robbery. The memories flooded in as I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone. I remembered long shifts babysitting neighborhood kids, rushing from school to the store, to clock in, then handing over my paycheck to my father, while he nodded like I was doing the right thing. Meanwhile, Samantha, 3 years younger than me, sat on the couch, surrounded by shopping bags from the mall. She never once contributed a dime. When she turned 16, my parents surprised her with a brand new Honda Civic, a red bow stretched across the hood. I had been at work that day, saving every penny to buy my own car. They made her pose for pictures, posted them online, bragged about how proud they were. No one ever gave me a car. I had taken the bus in freezing winters, walked home in the rain, scraped together tips until I could finally buy my own used Corolla. The unfairness was stitched into every corner of my upbringing. When I won a small scholarship, my senior year, $500 meant to help with books. My mother claimed she needed to use it for the light bill. She smiled at me across the table and said family comes first. That same week, she came home with a glossy pair of leather boots for Samantha. They were not cheap. I remember staring at the boots while she spun around the living room, modeling them, my scholarship money shining on her feet. Holidays never looked the way they did for other families. Instead of gifts wrapped in shiny paper, I often received envelopes with bills tucked inside, reminders of what I owed. Samantha's side of the tree sagged with presents, makeup kits, designer jackets, gadgets she would toss aside within weeks. My side had maybe one sweater and a card telling me how much rent was due. Even milestones became bargaining chips. At my high school graduation, my Aunt Marjorie gave me $200 in an envelope with a handwritten note about chasing my dreams. I barely had time to read it before my mother slipped it out of my hand. "I will keep this safe," she said. Safe meant gone. A month later, Samantha showed up at school with a new phone. I can still hear the echo of my father's voice whenever I protested. You should be grateful. Not every parent lets their grown children live at home. He never once acknowledged that I was still a kid when they started charging me, or that the money never went toward bills or groceries. The kitchen faucet leaked for months, the roof shingles curled and peeled. Nothing in that house improved no matter how much I paid. I learned to keep receipts. Groceries, textbooks, gas, anything I bought with my own money I stored in a shoebox under my bed. It was the only way I could convince myself that what I earned actually existed, that I had done something for myself even if my family pretended otherwise. Samantha lived like the world was a buffet laid out just for her. Spring break trips to California weekend, shopping sprees, even a summer in New York where my parents funded her internship housing. She had never held a job longer than a month. When she needed money, she batted her eyes, and my parents emptied their wallets. I worked 3 jobs during college, taking classes at the community college during the day, working the hospital cafeteria in the evenings, babysitting on weekends. Every shift was another small brick in the wall of independence I was trying to build. Still, my parents collected their rent like landlords, shaking their heads when I hesitated. Do you want to end up homeless, Madison? Even the pearls my grandmother left me after she passed never stayed mine. I had tucked the little box in my dresser, only to see the necklace gleaming around my mother's neck at a family dinner. When I asked about it, she waved her hand, said, "Family shares." The way she looked at me made it clear that family meant her and Samantha, not me. The weight of it all pressed against me in that moment as I sat alone in my small apartment. 8 years of stolen earnings, of sacrifices, rewritten as obligations, of being told over and over that family comes first. It was always Samantha's dreams that came first, my parents' comfort that came first. I was the one funding it all. I could see Samantha at 16 twirling car keys in her hand while I counted quarters for bus fare. I could see her trying on new sneakers while I calculated how many babysitting hours I needed to buy used textbooks. And now I could see her standing in front of a house with a red door, smiling for a picture, already thanking me for $30,000 I never agreed to give. My phone vibrated again. This time it was not another message from my mother, but a group text from my relatives. "Merry Christmas," they wrote, with little photos of their decorated living rooms. I stared at the words, felt the bitter laugh rise in my throat, and tossed the phone onto the bed. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes, the images of all those years colliding together. Rent receipts, vanished scholarships, pearls around the wrong neck. The story had been the same for nearly a decade. I gave, they took, Samantha smiled. The silence in my apartment wrapped around me, heavy and suffocating. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been too afraid to say out loud. What if I finally said no? I stood and walked to the window. Snow, still falling softly over Denver, the street below covered in white. Somewhere children were laughing as they built snowmen. Somewhere families were gathered around fireplaces with hot chocolate and cinnamon rolls. And in my family's house, my mother was probably sipping coffee, satisfied with her text, certain that by the end of the week, she would have $30,000 wired to her account. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, the ache in my chest deep and sharp. I thought of the shoebox of receipts still hidden under my bed back home, proof of all I had given. Proof that I had tried. The memories had left me drained, but also something else. Anger was no longer just a flicker. It was steady rising, filling every space inside me. The day outside looked peaceful. Inside me a storm was building. I pushed myself off the window and forced my mind back to the routine I knew best. Work. Mercy General Hospital had always been my anchor, the one place where effort was recognized and respect was earned. Even on Christmas Day, when most people were home in pajamas opening gifts, the pediatric floor was alive with the hum of machines, the chatter of nurses, and the laughter of children too young to understand how fragile their bodies were. I traded my heavy coat for scrubs again and tied my hair back in a quick knot. The fluorescent lights in the staff lounge stung my eyes, but the smell of coffee brought me back to life. I signed the charge sheet, checked my assignment board, and greeted the night nurse as she handed off reports. There was comfort in the routine, like steps in a dance I had mastered over the years. As I walked down the hall, a small voice called my name. A little boy with a bandaged arm waved from his bed, his mother beside him, smiling with exhaustion. I stopped, squeezed his tiny hand, and wished him a Merry Christmas. His eyes lit up in a way that made the sleepless night worth it. By mid-morning, Amelia appeared at the nurse's station, cheeks pink from the cold, carrying a cupcake with a single green candle stuck in the frosting. She set it quietly on the desk in front of me, shielding it from view of the other staff. "Merry Christmas, Maddie," she whispered. "You deserve more than this." I looked down at the small gesture, a swirl of frosting and a candy cane decoration, and felt a lump rise in my throat. No one in my family had so much as said the words that morning. I managed a smile, blinked back the sting in my eyes, and thanked her. She touched my arm briefly before hurrying off to check a patient. The floor buzzed with holiday cheer. Volunteers in red sweaters carried gift bags into rooms. Doctors paused to hand out candy canes, and parents snapped pictures of their children with stuffed animals donated by local charities. The walls echoed with laughter and beeping monitors, joy layered over anxiety in a way only a hospital can hold. During a rare lull, I sat at the break table with a few coworkers. Casey unwrapped a thermos her sister had given her, showing off the engraved initials. Tina scrolled through pictures on her phone of her family at the airport, boarding a plane to Florida for the holidays. "My brother surprised us with tickets to Disney," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Whole family trip, all expenses covered." Everyone oohed and laughed, but I felt my stomach knot. Their families gave, mine took. I thought of the messages on my phone, the $30,000 demand, the car already gone. I pressed my fingers against my temples, pretending to ease a headache, and kept silent. Dr. Alan Reynolds stopped by the table on his rounds, his white coat brushing against the chair as he leaned down. "Still here, Sanders," he said, his tone warm. "That is dedication. Mercy General is lucky to have you." The words landed heavier than he knew. Lucky. The hospital considered me lucky to have, while at home, my parents treated me like a bank account. I managed a nod, forcing a polite smile, but inside I felt something shift again. The rest of the shift blurred with routine. Charting vitals, adjusting IVs, soothing anxious parents, coaxing frightened children into taking medicine. Each task carried the rhythm I had grown to rely on, a rhythm that grounded me when life outside these walls tried to spin out of control. But every time my phone buzzed in my pocket, I felt the reminder. The contrast between this place where my name meant something and that house where my name was nothing but a signature on a check. Around noon, Amelia slipped into the lounge again, her face soft with concern. "You all right, Maddie? You look pale." I swallowed hard, debating how much to reveal. "Just tired," I said. "Too many holiday shifts." She studied me for a moment, like she could see the truth anyway, then nodded and sat down beside me. "For what it's worth, you do more here than most people could ever imagine. Do not let anyone make you forget that." Her words hit a place I did not want to touch yet. I busied myself with a stack of charts, pretending not to hear the tremor in my own breath. As the day wore on, the decorations in the hall seemed to mock me. Strings of lights twinkled on the bulletin board, paper snowflakes cut by volunteers fluttered whenever a door opened, and the smell of gingerbread drifted from the family room. Everything screamed warmth and belonging. Yet my own family had stripped me of both, with nothing more than a pair of cold text messages. By the end of my shift, my legs ached, but my mind burned hotter than when I had walked in. I gathered my things, waved goodbye to Amelia and Casey, and stepped out into the crisp Denver evening. The snow had stopped, leaving the world wrapped in white silence. My phone buzzed again, another message waiting, but I left it unread. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked toward the bus stop, the hospital lights glowing behind me. Inside those walls I was valued, respected, seen. Outside I was a wallet my parents expected to open on command. The contrast settled into me like a stone in water. It did not sink me, it made ripples. And those ripples were beginning to spread. The bus ride back to my parents' house felt longer than usual, the windows fogged from the breath of bundled passengers, and the streets glistening with patches of ice. By the time I stepped off at the corner of their neighborhood, the sky had darkened, houses glowing with Christmas lights strung across rooftops and bushes. I walked slowly up the familiar path, my boots crunching on the salted driveway, the air sharp in my lungs. Inside, the front door warmth hit me instantly. The scent of cinnamon and roasted ham floated through the hallway. The tree stood in the living room, covered in twinkling lights, and gold ornaments collected over decades. Wrapped gifts were stacked neatly beneath it, ribbons curling down their sides. On the dining table, the good china had been laid out candles, lit in tall holders, bowls of cranberry sauce and mashed potatoes steaming. From the outside, it looked like every postcard version of Christmas. Inside me, it felt like a trap. The beauty of it made my chest ache, because it was the same scene that had covered years of lies and manipulation. Samantha's voice rang from the couch, bright and animated. She held her phone in front of her, laughing into the camera. "Yes, we already made an offer," she said, tossing her long hair back. "The place is perfect, red door, big kitchen, and my sister Madison is helping with the down payment. 30,000. Can you believe it?" She winked at the screen, soaking in the praise from whoever was on the other end. I froze in the entryway, my coat still on my hands, stiff inside the pockets. Every word pressed down on me like a stone. She spoke as if it had already been decided, as if I were nothing more than a line item in her plan. When she finally noticed me, she lowered her phone slightly. "Oh, there she is, the star of the show," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. I rolled my shoulders back and gave her nothing. Elaine appeared from the kitchen, carrying a tray of cookies, her face bright but her eyes sharp. "You made it just in time," she said. "Dinner is almost ready." I nodded and slipped out of my coat, hanging it on the rack by the door, my stomach twisting tighter with every passing second. Richard sat in his recliner with the television turned low on a football game. He barely glanced at me, only giving a short nod before turning back to the screen. The normalcy of it all, the pretense that nothing was wrong, made my skin crawl. I walked past the tree, and my eyes caught the tags on some of the gifts. Samantha's name, scrawled in my mother's handwriting, appeared on half of them, while my name only dotted one or two. I tried not to linger on it, but the imbalance glared at me. Samantha ended her call with a flourish, slipping the phone into her purse. "Can you believe it, Maddie?" she said sweetly. "This time next year I'll be hosting Christmas in my new house." The way she said my name was laced with ownership, like I was already paying the mortgage. I forced a breath through my nose and stepped into the kitchen. The counters were crowded with serving dishes, steam rising from pots on the stove. My mother moved briskly, humming to herself, the picture of holiday cheer. She glanced at me with that same look she had given me since I was a teenager, a look that said, "Remember your role." I offered to set out the drinks just to keep my hands busy. As I carried glasses to the table, my sister drifted in behind me, trailing her perfume. She leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You'll come through, right, Maddie? It would mean the world to me." I kept my voice even. "That's not going to happen." Her smile froze for a fraction of a second before she turned it back on, bright as ever. "We will see," she said lightly, brushing past me to grab a roll from the counter. The pit in my stomach deepened. This was not just an assumption, it was a collective decision already made without me. The house was decorated, the food prepared, the stage set for me to sit down and play my part. As we gathered at the table, my father finally switched off the television and took his seat at the head. Elaine sat to his right, Samantha beside her, leaving me across from them. The candles flickered their glow, bouncing off the silverware. From anyone looking in, it would have been the perfect family holiday. To me, it was the clearest signal yet. Every smile, every casual word, every glance told me the same thing. The $30,000 was not a request, it was an expectation. I lifted my glass of water, the crystal trembling slightly in my hand. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of their scheme as clearly as the lights twinkling on the tree. They had already written my role, already spent my money, already counted me as the down payment. And in that moment I understood. The warmth of the house was nothing but decoration. The food, the gifts, the tree, even the laughter were only props. What sat beneath it all was entitlement, and I was the one expected to pay the bill. Plates clinked softly as my mother carried in the last dish and set it on the table. Steam curled from the roasted ham, the cranberry sauce gleamed red under the candlelight, and bowls of mashed potatoes and green beans crowded every inch of space. Samantha folded her napkin across her lap like she was sitting in a magazine photo, her eyes darting between my parents and me. I tried to steady my breathing as the food was passed around. Elaine poured herself a glass of wine, took a sip, then reached under her chair. When she straightened again, she held a white envelope in her hand. She set it gently in front of my plate, her smile tight but purposeful. "Go ahead," she said softly, as if we were sharing a secret. I stared at the envelope. My fingers didn't move. Richard leaned back in his chair, folding his arms over his chest, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the holiday music playing from the next room. "The car is gone, the money is spent. Now it is your turn to step up for your sister." The room tilted slightly as my pulse pounded in my ears. My mother nudged the envelope closer. "Inside are the account details. 30,000. We need it by the end of the week." Samantha let out a little laugh, almost giddy. "If you don't help me, Maddie, I'll lose the house. I already told everyone we're moving in." "Do you really want me to be humiliated like that?" Her words hung in the air like smoke. I reached out slowly, slid the envelope closer, and opened the flap. A piece of paper with handwritten routing numbers stared back at me. My hands were steady now, the storm inside me cooling into something harder, sharper. I placed the paper back inside, pressed the flap down, and laid the envelope neatly on the table. I met each of their eyes in turn. Then I spoke clearly, my voice calm and even. "I will not pay a single cent." The silence that followed was so heavy, it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My father's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening against the tablecloth. Samantha's fork clattered onto her plate. Elaine's face flushed, as if I had slapped her. "What do you mean you won't pay?" Richard demanded, leaning forward. His voice was low, controlled, but I knew that tone. It was the warning growl before the explosion. "I mean exactly what I said. I worked for that money. It is mine. The car was mine too, and you had no right to sell it." Elaine tried to soften the moment, her voice trembling with forced sweetness. "Maddie, honey, we are a family. Families share. Your sister is starting her life. She deserves this chance." My chest burned, but my voice stayed level. "I shared enough. 8 years of rent payments, groceries, bills, money you never once accounted for. How much more do you think you can take from me?" Samantha leaned across the table, her eyes flashing. "You're being dramatic. It is just money. You make plenty. If you cared about me at all, you would do this." I held her gaze. "If you cared about me, you wouldn't ask." The candles flickered in the draft as the weight of my words settled. My father shoved his chair back and stood towering over the table. "You ungrateful girl. After everything we have done for you, after raising you, feeding you, giving you a roof, you cannot even help your sister." I pushed my chair back slowly, standing to meet his height. "I paid for that roof. Every month since I was 18. You never gave me anything without strings attached." His face darkened, veins rising at his temples. Elaine's hand fluttered in the air as if to calm him, but her eyes pleaded with me instead. "Please, Maddie, let's not ruin Christmas. Just write the check. We will all feel better once it is settled." I laughed, a hollow sound that startled even me. Settled. That word has always meant me giving and you taking. Not tonight. Richard slammed his fist on the table, the silverware rattling, wine spilling over the edge of Elaine's glass. His voice boomed, each word sharp as glass. "You will pay or you will regret it." Samantha's lips curled in a pout, her voice rising into a whine. "If you don't help me, I cannot close on the house. Kyle is counting on me. Everyone is counting on me." I looked at her, really looked at her, the picture of entitlement in her holiday dress with diamond earrings that I knew my parents had bought, and I felt nothing but clarity. "You made promises with money that was never yours. That is not my problem." The room erupted at once. Elaine's sobs filled the air. Richard cursed under his breath. Samantha shouted that I was ruining everything. But I felt strangely calm, like I was standing in the eye of a storm, while everything spun around me. I picked up my napkin, placed it neatly beside my plate, and straightened my back. This was the first time I had ever told them no, and meant it. The noise rose and fell around me, but I stayed still, anchored by a truth that had been building inside me for years. I would not be their bank. Not tonight, not ever again. I rested my hands on the table, steady and unmoving, and waited for their next move. Richard's chair screeched against the hardwood as he shoved it back and lurched to his feet. His fist slammed down so hard the plates jumped, gravy sloshing onto the tablecloth. "If you will not put this family first, then you are no daughter of mine." His voice cracked like thunder, loud enough to rattle the glass ornaments dangling from the chandelier. Elaine gasped as if the words wounded her, her hands fluttering to her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mascara smudging at the corners. How can you be so cruel, Maddie? How can you look your sister in the eye on Christmas and say no, after everything we sacrificed? Her sobs rose sharp and theatrical, filling the room with guilt as thick as smoke. Samantha, untouched by the chaos, crossed her arms and leaned forward. Her lips curved into a pout that looked practiced, almost rehearsed. You do not understand what you are doing to me. This house is my dream. You are destroying it. You are destroying me. Her eyes flashed as if my refusal were a personal betrayal. For years those words would have pinned me into silence. Tonight I sat taller. My voice cut through the noise, calm but hard as glass. Family does not rob each other. I am not your ATM. The room snapped still. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to pause. Samantha's jaw dropped. Elaine let out a sharp breath, and Richard's eyes narrowed until they were thin slits of rage. From the corner of my eye I caught movement beyond the frosted window. Mr. and Mrs. Carter from next door had stepped onto their porch, drawn by the volume of our voices. Their faces tilted toward the glow of our dining room, their expressions tight with curiosity and concern. My stomach clenched, but I did not look away. Richard leaned across the table, his breath hot. His words slow and deliberate. You think because you wear that uniform at the hospital, you are better than us. You think that little paycheck makes you important. We made you. Without us, you would be nothing. My heart pounded, but my tone stayed even. I worked for everything I have. I paid you rent since I was 18. I bought groceries when the fridge was empty. I fixed the bills you ignored. You did not make me. You drained me. Elaine shot to her feet, her chair crashing against the wall. She rushed around the table and clutched my arm, her nails biting into my sleeve. Please, baby, do not do this. Just write the check. 30,000 is nothing compared to family. Think about Samantha. Think about how much she deserves this start. Her voice cracked on, deserves the sound rehearsed from years of wielding pity like a blade. I wrenched my arm free. A family that demands 30,000 from one child while handing everything to another is not a family. It is a con. Samantha shoved her plate aside, the fork clattering to the floor. You think you are a martyr. You want everyone to feel sorry for you. Newsflash, no one cares. When you are out on the street, when you are alone, remember you chose this. Her words were sharp, but her voice trembled at the edges. I gave a bitter laugh, the kind that comes only when the truth has burned away every excuse. I have been closer to the street than any of you, because I carried this family on my back while you sat comfortable. The scent of roasted ham and cinnamon twisted sour in my nose. Richard circled the table like a predator, his shadow falling over me. He loomed so close I could see the threadbare edges of his flannel shirt. You will regret this, he hissed. No, I answered, my voice steady. You will. Elaine sobbed louder, pressing both hands to her face. Samantha's words rose again, shrill enough to pierce. You are jealous, Maddie. That is all this is. Jealous because it is finally my turn to get what I want. I stood slowly, my chair legs scraping against the tile, the sound a warning in the tense quiet. I am not jealous, I said, locking eyes with her. I am free. The words landed like a strike. Samantha's mouth opened and closed, searching for a comeback. Elaine's sobs hiccuped into silence. Richard's fists clenched, his knuckles white, but he did not move closer. From outside came the faint crunch of footsteps in snow. The Carters had stopped on the sidewalk, now whispering, their faces tilted toward our windows. The humiliation my parents feared most, the neighbors witnessing cracks in the picture-perfect facade, was happening in real time. I glanced back at the table, at the candles flickering wildly in the draft, at the spilled wine staining the cloth, at the faces of people who had always expected me to fold. For once, I did not. Richard growled low, his chest heaving. If you walk out of this house without helping, do not bother coming back. You are finished here. I straightened my shoulders, my pulse steady, the fear that had once ruled me replaced with clarity. Then maybe it is time I left. The silence afterward felt like glass shattering, invisible pieces cutting through the air. Elaine collapsed back into her chair, whispering through tears about how I was tearing the family apart. Samantha muttered curses under her breath, clutching her phone as if already preparing her sob story for Kyle. Richard stood rigid, arms crossed, his authority cracked but unyielding. I turned toward the hallway, each step echoing on the hardwood floor. Behind me, the noise rose again. Elaine's cries, Samantha's protests, Richard's muttered threats, but it all sounded distant now, like waves crashing far from shore. At the top of the stairs, I paused, my hand resting on the banister. The tree's lights flickered below, the reflection of red and gold ornaments glinting like the life they always wanted me to play along with. I had no part in it anymore. My chest rose with a long breath, the storm inside settling into steel resolve. Whatever came next would not be easy, but it would be mine. The voices downstairs blended into a muffled roar as I walked to my room and closed the door with finality. I leaned against the door and let the sound of the latch settle in my ears. For the first time all night, the noise of their accusations dulled into a distant murmur. My room looked almost the same as it had when I was a teenager. Posters still curling on the walls, an old desk pushed against the window, the same twin bed with a quilt my grandmother had sewn. But to me it no longer felt like a safe place. It felt like the final reminder of how much I had given away. I pulled an old shoebox from the closet and set it on the bed. Inside were 8 years of folded slips of paper rent receipts written in my father's handwriting, each one marked with the month, the year, and the $500 I had handed over like clockwork. I spread them across the blanket, the pile growing higher, each slip a small confession of how long I had let myself be drained. In the bottom drawer of my desk, I found the manila folder where I had tucked away the car documents. The original title, crisp and official, with only my name typed neatly across it. Taped beside it was the newer registration, my father's jagged signature forged next to mine. I held them side by side, the difference glaring. My throat tightened as I thought of the Corolla sitting in someone else's driveway, now sold without my consent. I sat down and pulled my laptop from my bag. The screen glowed in the dark room as I began typing line after line of figures. 8 years of rent at $500 a month. $48,000. Groceries I had bought and never been repaid. $3,000. Bills I had covered during emergencies. $2,000 more. The car valued at $12,000. Total losses over $60,000, taken not by strangers, but by the people who claimed to love me. I printed the summary page and stacked it with the receipts and documents, clipping everything together in a thick bundle. As the printer hummed, I felt a strange calm wash over me. For years, I had hidden these scraps of evidence as if they were secrets I should be ashamed of. Tonight, they became my proof. My suitcase waited in the corner of the closet. I dragged it out and began packing with methodical precision. Scrubs, a few sweaters, my stethoscope, the bracelet Amelia had given me, my nursing certificates, my passport, my grandmother's earrings tucked carefully into a small box. Every item I chose felt like a step further away from the life they had chained me to. Downstairs, their voices still rose and fell. Samantha's shrill protests, Elaine's sobs, Richard's heavy footsteps pacing across the floor. I paused for a moment listening, then zipped the suitcase shut. I was done listening. When I carried the suitcase into the hall, the weight of it steadied me. This was no longer their house to trap me in. It was simply a building I was leaving behind. I went quietly down the stairs, the banister cool beneath my hand, the lights from the tree casting shadows across the walls. The kitchen smelled of wine and smoke. A glass had shattered on the tile near the dishwasher, red staining the grout. On the counter sat the platter of ham, untouched since the shouting began. I placed the bundle of documents carefully in the center of the table, the heading of my summary page facing up in bold black ink. Family financial record. I laid a pen beside it, though I knew they would never use it to admit anything. It was not for them to sign. It was for them to see. For a moment I stood there listening to the muffled voices drifting from the living room. Then I reached up and straightened the papers, my hands steady. This was my Christmas gift to them, the truth they had ignored wrapped not in ribbon but in evidence. I walked back through the dining room, past the flickering candles that had burned low, past the tree glittering with ornaments that suddenly looked gaudy and cheap. My suitcase wheels bumped against the step as I climbed back upstairs. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding not with fear but with resolve. My phone buzzed with a text from Amelia, asking if I was free later. I typed back quickly. I need a place tonight. Can I come by? Her reply came within minutes. Of course, bring whatever you need. Relief swept through me. I looked around the room one last time, the walls heavy with memories of slammed doors and silenced arguments. I would not miss them. I stood, grabbed the handle of my suitcase, and pulled it toward the door. Each roll of the wheels over the wooden floor sounded like a clock striking the end of an era. I was not running away. I was walking out with proof in my hands and freedom in my chest. Downstairs, the voices rose again, but I no longer strained to hear the words. My gift to them waited on the table. My gift to myself was the decision to finally leave. I lifted the handle of my suitcase and rolled it slowly across the carpeted floor of the hallway. The door to my room clicked shut behind me, sealing in the echoes of all the years I had spent there. Each step toward the stairs felt heavier than the last, but also more certain. Downstairs, the voices crashed like waves, angry and desperate, yet I felt strangely calm as I placed one hand on the banister and began my descent. The tree glowed in the corner of the living room, ornaments glittering in red and gold, their reflection shimmering on the polished floor. It looked picture-perfect, the kind of Christmas display my mother adored, showing off to neighbors. But all I saw was artifice. I had finally learned that the glow was not warmth. It was camouflage. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I reached the bottom step. I pulled it out and saw Amelia's name. "Where are you, Maddie? Do you need me to come get you?" I typed back quickly, my fingers trembling. "I need to leave. Can I stay with you tonight?" The response came almost instantly. "Of course. Guest room is ready. Get here safe." A breath escaped me, sharp and unsteady, as if I had been holding it in for years. I pushed the suitcase across the rug and headed toward the front door. From the living room, Samantha's voice cut through the air, shrill and entitled. "If she walks out that door, she is done with us. Do you hear me, Mom? She is finished." Elaine's sobs tangled with her words, Richard's low growl rumbling beneath them. I opened the door without looking back. The cold night air hit me fresh and clean. Snowflakes drifted slowly under the glow of the streetlights. My boots crunched against the driveway, each step pulling me further away from the shouting. I closed the door firmly behind me, the latch snapping into place like a final answer. The street was quiet, lined with houses draped in twinkling lights, wreaths on every door, the faint sound of Christmas music drifting from open windows. I pulled my scarf tighter and walked toward the corner bus stop, dragging the suitcase behind me. My phone buzzed again, this time from the rideshare app, confirming a driver was on the way. A white sedan pulled up minutes later, headlights bright against the snow. The driver, a woman in her 50s with a soft voice, popped the trunk and helped me lift my bag inside. "Long night?" she asked, gently as I climbed in. I stared out the window, my breath fogging the glass. "Long life," I said quietly, and she did not press further. Denver blurred past, streets glowing with colored lights, shop windows frosted with fake snow children, still bundled in coats clutching toys. The city looked alive with holiday cheer, but to me it felt like another world entirely. My chest tightened as we passed my old high school, the grocery store, where I had worked shifts at 16, the places where all the obligations had begun. Each landmark reminded me of how long I had carried the weight. When the car stopped in front of Amelia's building, I spotted her immediately through the glass doors. She was waiting in the lobby, still in scrubs, hair pulled back, arms crossed against the cold. The moment I stepped inside, she rushed to me and wrapped me in a hug so tight I nearly collapsed into it. "You are safe now," she whispered against my shoulder. Tears burned my eyes, though I swallowed them back. She took my suitcase and led me upstairs to her apartment. The guest room was small but spotless, the bed neatly made with fresh sheets, a folded blanket at the end, a lamp casting a warm glow. It felt more like home in that instant than my parents' house ever had. Once I had set my things down, Amelia returned with 2 mugs of tea. She sat across from me at the small kitchen table, her eyes full of questions she did not force me to answer. Instead, she simply reached across and squeezed my hand. "Whatever they said to you, Maddie, you do not deserve it." The dam cracked. I told her everything. The texts on Christmas morning, the car they had sold behind my back, the demand for $30,000 to cover Samantha's house, the years of rent slips, the forged registration, the scholarship money that vanished into boots and handbags. My voice shook at first, then steadied as the words spilled out. Amelia's grip tightened. "That is abuse, Maddie. That is not family." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my bones. I am never going back there. Not again. Her phone buzzed and she quickly called Casey on speaker. Within minutes, Casey's voice filled the room sharp and protective. Maddie, you are not going to stay homeless or trapped with them. I know a landlord near Capitol Hill who just lost a tenant. Safe neighborhood month-to-month lease. I will connect you tomorrow. Tina chimed in later, texting me photos of another complex with a note that read, "You are not alone. We will help you find your footing." Each call, each message, each offer of help felt like pieces of a new family forming around me. For the first time in years, I was not the one giving. I was the one receiving. That night, long after Amelia had gone to bed, I stood by her living room window. Across the street, apartments glowed with their own lights, families laughing inside, children racing past decorated trees. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, the hum of the city around me, and whispered words meant only for me. I bought back my freedom. The sentence lingered in the quiet, settling into me like a vow. I turned off the lamp, closed the curtain, and stepped into the guest room. The bed was warm, the pillow soft, and for the first time in years I let my eyes close without bracing for the next demand. The storm was behind me now. Sleep came quickly, carrying me into the first peace I had known in a long time. Morning light poured into the kitchen of my parents' house, cutting across the table where I had left the bundle of receipts, contracts, and calculations. Elaine was the first to walk in her slippers, dragging across the tile. She reached for the coffee pot, her gaze falling on the stack of papers. At first she frowned as if she had stumbled upon clutter, but when she saw the bold heading, her breath caught. Family financial record. Her hand trembled as she flipped through the pages. Receipts with my father's handwriting. Bank statements. The original title of my Corolla with only my name. Then the forged registration, his signature added in shaky pen. The list of totals, line after line, building to more than $60,000, drained from me. Her wail cut through the house, high and raw, a sound that startled even the ornaments on the tree. Richard stormed in, his voice already rising. What now? Elaine shoved the papers at him with shaking hands. Look at this. Look what she did. He grabbed the stack, scanning the pages, his face darkening with every line. His fist clenched around the edges, crumpling the sheets. She documented everything he barked, every damn cent. Samantha rushed in, her phone in her hand, hair tangled from sleep. What is going on? Elaine sobbed into her sleeve. She left this for us. She wrote down every dollar, every receipt. Richard's roar shook the walls. She is trying to ruin us. Samantha snatched a page from his hand and read the numbers aloud, her voice climbing higher with each one. 48,000 in rent, 12,000 for the car, 3,000 groceries. This is insane. She cannot do this. Her eyes went wide, panic flooding her features. Kyle is going to ask about the down payment. What am I supposed to tell him now? The shouting grew louder, bouncing off the kitchen tiles, spilling into the yard. Elaine collapsed into a chair, clutching her head. We will be humiliated, she cried. Everyone will know. Through the front window, I imagined the Carters pausing mid-breakfast, hearing the commotion again. And I was right. Their blinds shifted. A moment later, their front door opened, and they stepped outside, peering toward the Clark house with concern. Richard's voice boomed, fueled by panic. She cannot take this outside these walls. Do you understand? Not one word leaves this house. But Elaine was already unraveling. She pushed past him, her robe swinging open as she stumbled across the porch. The cold air hit her, but she did not stop. She ran to the Carters, crying out, "Please, you have to help me. She is trying to destroy our family." The Carters froze, stunned by her outburst. Mrs. Carter placed a tentative hand on Elaine's arm, while Miss Carter glanced toward their windows, where curious faces were now beginning to appear. The neighbors had heard enough over the years to know something was off, but this was the first time the facade cracked wide open. Back inside, Samantha slammed her phone on the counter. Kyle is going to think I lied to him. His parents will never let us buy the house now. Do you realize what you have done? She screamed toward the empty stairwell, as if I might still be there to hear it. Richard pounded the table with his fist. Enough. She left her little performance. That is all this is. A show. We will deny it. We will say she forged it. His words tumbled fast, desperate, as if he could still control the narrative. But Elaine's sobs grew louder as more neighbors stepped onto their porches, drawn by her cries. The Carters tried to usher her back inside, but she shook her head wildly. She kept repeating the same words over and over. She wrote it all down, every dollar, everyone will know. By mid-morning, the phone lines lit up. Cousins, aunts, and uncles had already heard snippets. News travels fast in families that thrive on whispers. And it did not take long before Aunt Marjorie called my cell. I had just poured myself coffee in Amelia's kitchen when the screen lit with her name. My hands shook as I answered. Her voice came sharp and clear. "Maddie, what in God's name happened? Elaine is hysterical. She says you left some kind of file." I closed my eyes, picturing the bundle of papers on the kitchen table, my mother clutching them like a confession she never expected to face. "Yes," I said quietly. "I left the truth." Marjorie's voice dropped to a whisper thick with disbelief. "Is it real? Did they really take that much from you?" "Every penny," I answered. "Rent, groceries, the car, the scholarship, all of it." For a moment she was silent, and I heard the faint rustle of her hand covering the receiver. Then she spoke again, her tone hardening. "You did the right thing, Maddie, but you should know the whole neighborhood is talking already." Elaine went to the Carters. People saw. "Richard is screaming like a madman. Samantha is in hysterics. It is all unraveling." I pressed the mug to my lips, though I had no appetite for coffee. "Let it unravel," I whispered. Back at the Clark house, the storm raged. Richard pacing the floor, swearing under his breath. Elaine sobbing against the counter. Samantha dialing frantically, leaving messages for Kyle for her friends. Her voice desperate as she tried to explain away numbers that could not be explained. The Carters stood in their yard, whispering with the Wilsons across the street. Word spread with the speed of wildfire from neighbor to neighbor, from one phone call to the next. The perfect Clark family, hosts of holiday dinners and church picnics, was cracking in full view of the community they had always tried to impress. And upstairs, my old room stood empty. The closet bare, the drawers cleared, the bed stripped of anything that tied me to that house. Only the evidence on the table remained silent and undeniable, the last gift I ever left them. The next morning, I sat in the reception area of a law office downtown, my suitcase tucked neatly at my side, the manila folder clutched in my hands. Snow from the storm still clung to my boots, melting into tiny puddles on the polished tile. My stomach was tight with nerves, but beneath it ran a steady current of resolve. For once, I was not here to defend myself. I was here to protect myself. A woman in a navy suit opened the door to the office and called my name. "Judith Hale," she introduced herself with a firm handshake, her eyes clear and steady. We walked into her office, walls lined with books, degrees framed in dark wood, a window overlooking the city streets. She gestured for me to sit, and I laid the thick file on her desk, sliding it toward her. "These are receipts," I began. "Rent payments since I was 18. Registration papers for my car. The original title with only my name. The newer one with a forged signature. Scholarship checks that vanished. Grocery lists, bills." She held up her hand, gently nodding as she opened the file. "You brought documentation," she said. "That is very good. Most people never keep this kind of record." She leafed through the stack, her brows lifting, as she read the forged DMV paperwork. "This is clear-cut," she explained. "If your father added his name without your consent and sold the vehicle, that is fraud. That alone could bring criminal charges." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay steady. "He told me it was just a renewal form. I signed without reading." Judith nodded, her tone practical but firm. "Deception in obtaining a signature is still fraud. The Department of Motor Vehicles treats it seriously. If reported, there will be an investigation." She flipped further, pulling out the rent receipts with my father's handwriting scrawled across each one. 8 years of payments," she murmured. "At $500 a month, that is $48,000. While the law may not view rent between family members as inherently illegal, this record demonstrates financial abuse. In civil court, it strengthens your case for damages." I sat straighter, the weight of years shifting slightly off my shoulders. "What happens now?" Judith organized the papers into piles with swift precision. "First, we send a demand letter requesting compensation for the value of the car, along with acknowledgement of the rent payments and other amounts you documented. If they refuse, we file suit. She looked me directly in the eye. You need to understand something, Madison. Once this process begins, it cannot be hidden. Your father may be investigated criminally for the forgery, and it will shake your entire family. Are you prepared for that? Images of last night flooded me. Elaine sobbing in the neighbor's yard. Richard shouting until his face turned crimson. Samantha panicking about her house. The shame already rippling across the neighborhood. I thought of my grandmother's pearls tucked safely in my suitcase of Amelia's quiet apartment where I had finally slept in peace. Yes, I said firmly. I am prepared. Judith leaned back, tapping a pen lightly against the desk. Then here is what I will do. By the end of the day, I will draft the demand letter and send it by certified mail. I will also alert the DMV regarding the forged registration. Once they see this documentation, they will likely open a fraud investigation. If your father is questioned, he could face fines or worse. Her words should have shaken me, but instead, I felt a calmness spread. For years, he had wielded control through fear, through money, through guilt. Now, the fear was his to carry. Judith handed me a copy of the client agreement to sign. This is the start, she said. You are taking back what is yours. I signed, my hand steady, and slid the paper back to her. By the time I stepped out onto the snowy sidewalk, the air felt sharper, clearer. Cars hissed past on slushy roads, people hurried with shopping bags, but I felt untethered from the weight that had bound me for so long. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Aunt Marjorie. They are losing it, she wrote. Your father is raging, your mother is calling everyone, Samantha is screaming about the house. Neighbors saw everything. Now word is spreading through the family. I typed back one simple line. They will have to face it. The sun broke briefly through the clouds, glinting off the icy street. I pulled my scarf tighter, the folder now tucked safely in my bag. For the first time, the path ahead belonged entirely to me. Word of the letter Judith sent spread faster than I expected. By the following week, the Clark name, once polished at church socials and neighborhood gatherings, was tangled in whispers. It started with Samantha. Without the down payment she had promised Kyle, the deal on the house collapsed. The seller moved on, taking another offer, and Kyle's temper flared when he realized Samantha had never actually secured the $30,000. You told me it was handled, he shouted, according to what Aunt Marjorie later relayed. You swore your sister was covering it. Samantha cried, pleaded, swore she would figure it out, but Kyle was done. He broke off the engagement that night, walked out, and did not answer her calls. Samantha's world unraveled quickly after that. She stayed in her childhood bedroom shades, drawn her phone buzzing with messages she ignored. She stopped showing up to her job at the boutique downtown, ashamed of the whispers that followed her through the aisles. Friends she had once bragged to about the new house now avoided her, uncomfortable with her public fall. Meanwhile, Richard faced calls from cousins and uncles demanding explanations. They had seen the receipts, the forged documents, the calculations. At Christmas dinners past, he had strutted as the provider, the patriarch, who kept everything in order. Now he was the man accused of stealing from his own daughter, of forging her signature. His voice, once loud enough to dominate any room, was quieter when people asked questions. Elaine tried a different tactic. She called me 3 times in one afternoon, her voice breaking into sobs on voicemail. Please, Maddie, come home. We can fix this. Your sister needs you. Your father is not himself. We are family. Each word was dipped in desperation, but none of it touched me. For years she had watched and done nothing. Tears could not erase that. The neighborhood joined the chorus. The Carters, who had once smiled politely across their yard, now told anyone who would listen about the night Elaine had come crying to their porch. The Wilsons across the street spread the story further, each version gaining weight, until the Clark family's reputation collapsed under its own rot. It was Marjorie who finally confronted Richard face to face. I was not there, but she described it later when we sat together in her living room. She had gone to their house, walked straight into the kitchen where the file had first been discovered, and looked Richard in the eye. You ruined Madison's future, she told him. You robbed her to build a pedestal for Samantha. You let one child drown so the other could float. Richard had no answer. He shouted, he denied, he waved his arms, but Marjorie's voice cut through him. She told me his face went pale when she mentioned the DMV forgery, that for the first time he looked less like a tyrant and more like a man cornered. Days later, she came to me with a small box. Her hands shook slightly as she placed it in mine. "These were your grandmother's," she said softly. "Pearls and gold kept safe in my house all these years. They belong with you now, Maddie. Not with Elaine, not with Samantha, with you." I opened the lid, and the sight of the jewelry pulled the breath from my lungs. The necklace my grandmother had worn every Easter, the earrings she had promised me when I was little. I touched them gently, my throat tight. Marjorie squeezed my hand. "This is not about money, it is about recognition. Your grandmother loved you fiercely. She wanted you to have these, and I will not let them be stolen like everything else." Tears blurred my vision as I nodded, clutching the box to my chest. It was not the pearls or the gold that mattered. It was the acknowledgement that someone in my family saw me, chose me, gave without expecting to take. Outside Marjorie's window, the snow had begun to fall again, quiet and steady. For the first time in a long time, I felt the storm inside me slow. The house I left behind could crumble. The whispers could spread. The people who tried to break me could face the weight of their choices. I had something stronger now. Proof, freedom, and the love of someone who did not see me as a wallet, but as family. I set the box carefully beside me on the couch, my fingers still resting on the smooth lid. For the first time, the pieces of my life no longer felt like debts to be collected, but treasures to be protected. A few weeks later, I carried the final box of my belongings up 3 flights of narrow stairs, pausing halfway to catch my breath as snow fell steadily outside the windows. The apartment was small, barely more than a kitchen, a bedroom, and a living room that opened onto a narrow balcony, but when I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I felt a rush of peace. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and new carpet. For the first time in my life, every inch of space belonged to me. No one could barge in, no one could take what I worked for, and no one could tell me that my sacrifices were owed. The settlement Judith negotiated had arrived just days before. $38,000, a number that stared back at me from my bank app, undeniable and steady. When I saw it, my knees nearly buckled. That money would not erase the years I had lost, but it was proof that I had not been crazy, proof that what was taken from me had value, proof that the truth was finally on record. With part of it, I bought a silver sedan, reliable and safe, something to get me to work without the sting of betrayal every time I looked at it. Signing the papers at the dealership felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been stolen. The rest of the money went carefully into a savings account and a small emergency fund. I opened the online dashboard and stared at the numbers until the reality settled. I had a cushion now, something that meant I would never be cornered by threats of eviction or forced to shoulder someone else's dream at the expense of my survival. At Mercy General, I walked the halls with a lighter step. The pediatric ward still buzzed with energy, the cries of toddlers blending with the laughter of nurses, but my chest no longer carried the constant weight of home. My coworkers noticed. "You look different, Amelia," said one morning, as she poured us both coffee. "Different good." Word had spread quietly among the staff about what had happened, though I never explained every detail. They gave me space to breathe, but they also filled it with small gestures. Casey left a handwritten card in my locker with a note that read, "You are stronger than they will ever admit." Tina brought over takeout one night and helped me hang curtains in the apartment. Each act wrapped me in a warmth I had never felt beneath the Clark roof. At the end of January, they surprised me during a late shift. I was called into the break room to find balloons tied to chairs, paper plates stacked high, and a cake on the counter. "Merry late Christmas," Casey said with a grin. "You deserve a holiday of your own." Amelia handed me a bag filled with small but thoughtful gifts. A potted fern, a pair of mugs, and a framed photo of the 4 of us in scrubs, tired but smiling after a long shift. I broke down crying right there, the tears hot against my cheeks, as Amelia wrapped me in a hug. "This is your family too," she whispered in my ear. When I set the gifts up in my apartment later that night, the place felt transformed. The plant sat on the windowsill, reaching for the pale winter sun. The mugs lined my cabinet. The framed photo stood proudly on the table beside the small wooden box of pearls from my grandmother. I stared at them side by side, a reminder of both the legacy I had earned and the new family I had chosen. In early February, a message popped up on my phone from Samantha. It was long, full of apologies, explanations, and words about how she finally understood what I had endured. She said Kyle had left the house, was gone, her friends avoided her. She admitted she had leaned on me too much, believed in promises our parents had made to her that were never hers to collect. My eyes scanned the paragraphs slowly. For a moment, I almost felt the tug of obligation, the voice that had always told me to forgive, to bend, to fix. But I set the phone face down on the counter and let the silence speak for me. Some wounds do not heal with words, and some messages deserve no reply. Life began to settle into a rhythm that was mine alone. Early mornings on the pediatric floor, long nights filled with charts and laughter and the chaos of children, followed by evenings where I came home to my own apartment, my own rules, my own quiet. On weekends, I drove my new car into the mountains, the road winding past frozen rivers and snow-heavy pines. Each mile stretched the distance between me and the weight of the past. Elaine called once more, leaving a voicemail heavy with tears. "Please come home, Maddie. Your father is lost without you. Samantha needs you. We can start over." Her words no longer reached me. They sounded like echoes from a place I had already left behind. Marjorie visited me often, bringing groceries or just sitting with me at the kitchen table. One night she clasped my hands and looked me in the eyes. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said firmly. "You broke the pattern. You built something new." She glanced toward the pearls on the table, their shine soft under the lamp, then toward the framed photo of my coworkers. She was right. I had both roots and wings now. The following week, Amelia invited me to her apartment for a belated holiday dinner with friends from the hospital. They decorated with string lights and played soft music, passing around small gifts and mugs of hot cider. When they raised a toast, it was not for duty or bloodline or obligation. It was for choice, for resilience, for family built by respect instead of control. Driving home afterward, I looked out at the lights of Denver glowing against the snow. I realized that the love I had been searching for all those years had been waiting not in my parents' approval or my sister's comfort, but in the friendships that celebrated me without condition. Later that night, I sat on my couch, tea steaming in one of the mugs, the plant at my side, the pearls, glinting faintly under the lamp. My eyes lingered on them as my heart finally settled into a quiet certainty. Family is not who shares your DNA. Family is who respects your worth. If this story touched something in you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you have ever had to draw a line with family, or if you found strength in the family you chose. And if you want to hear more stories of standing tall when lines are crossed, remember to like and subscribe. There are so many journeys ahead, and together we can walk them with courage.